So for those who just joined in, I was just giving a quick little introduction as to what we're doing today, which is some goblet prototype making. And these are the previous prototypes that they've been working on already. They're trying to create a variety of different designs for each of these goblets. And then eventually they'll lay them all out and choose which one they want to be the final product for an upcoming auction that we have once a year called Red Hot. For Red Hot, every year they make many of these goblets after choosing the prototype that they like. And we are actually working with the blue color that you see with one of these goblets up on the front pedestal. This is a large tube of blown glass at the center bench of that blue color. This is going to be sectioned off into small cup shapes. And then eventually these individual cups will be turned into the different parts of the goblet, such as the drinking portion on top, and then also the blown foot on the very bottom of the goblet. And right now we are sectioning off our first cup. And whenever Gabe is doing this, which he's doing with a pair of jacks, by the way, these two metal blades, he's not cinching all the way down. He's leaving an opening that passes through the bottom of the cup and into the rest of the tube. So when they break this cup off, this is going to leave them with an opening into the rest of the tube, and they can then just continue to open it up, section it off, open it up, section it off over and over again until they've used up all of this glass. And this is basically just a little bit of prep work that we're doing right now. Once we finish these cups, by the way, we're putting them in the garage, which is this large silver box right here. And this will keep anything that we put inside of it warm at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is going to prevent thermal shock. But 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit is actually kind of cold for glass. It's not going to be melting. It's not going to be changing shape or anything. It's just going to be holding it at this warm temperature. And just to point out a couple things in the hot shop real quick. So of course we're using this furnace at the center bench pretty frequently. This is just used for reheating the glass, making it more malleable, hotter. And this furnace runs around 21 to 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. And the glass is completely molten at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we were to stay in that furnace long enough, this glass would become the texture of honey. It would become very viscous and almost kind of drippy. So we do only go into the furnace for shorter periods of time since we're just trying to make the glass malleable. We're not trying to completely melt it. But speaking of the glass, in these large tanks at the closed doors, this is where we're getting our clear molten glass that starts pretty much any project. And you can imagine it's just like this giant pool of glass sitting inside of there, maybe up to my hip. It can hold up to around 1,000 pounds of clear molten glass, and it stays at a really steady 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So you should see us use those furnaces later on that have the glass in them, but for right now we are just going to continue working with the glass that we already have. And you'll notice we also have another furnace over on the right bench. There's not really a difference between the furnace that we're using right now and that one over on the right. Might be a little bit smaller, but they should run around the same temperature. It just allows us to work at two benches at the same time instead of one, so we can work on multiple parts of the same project at the same time. So actually the different colors come from different metals and minerals mixed into the glass. in the very beginning of the process, and we don't mix the colors here in the hot shop ourselves, but we get them shipped in this bar form right here. It could come in any color you can imagine, whether it's transparent or opaque like this one, and that is called a color bar. And we will take a section of that color bar, melt it down, and then actually drop it onto a small clear bubble of glass before spreading it over top. And it creates this thin layer of color across the entire bubble, or surrounding the entire bubble. So if we were to look at the cross section of this glass, you would actually be able to see that it's just this really thin layer of color. It's sandwiched between layers of clear glass. And this is something you'll probably see us doing every now and then today, but right now Gabe has just hung this bubble down towards the floor, or the glass down towards the floor, and this has actually stretched this glass out, basically just using gravity as another one of our tools. And I always like to point that out. And we now have a longer tube, and he's going to be able to section this off into even more sections than he would have been able to previously. And you can see these cups are a little bit smaller, so I'm guessing that these ones are going to be used for the smaller bubbles, such as the blown foot of our goblets, and those larger cups are going to be used for the larger sections, such as the bowl of the goblet. And for those who just joined in, I just want to let you know what we have going on real quick. So today we are working on some goblet prototypes, and we have a few prototypes already made down on this front pedestal. These are a few designs that they've made so far, along with the color scheme that they've been going for, which is this sort of almost a little bit green-blue, and then this light pink color. This one almost even has a little bit of an orange tinge to it. And they have been experimenting a little bit with colors and, of course, different shapes and sizes of goblets. We're most likely going to see them make something completely different than what you see on the front pedestal, since those are also different from each other as well. And right now, as you walked in, they are just finishing sectioning off this little tube of color that they've made. And this is just turning into these small cups of glass, just like you see Gabe making right now. And these cups of glass will be used individually to create the blown sections of the goblet, such as the bowl up on top and the foot down at the bottom of the goblet. And once they have finished making these little cups, I believe they will get started on making some of the goblet parts. They'll usually start with the bowl section and then kind of work their way down and make the stem and then the foot. And just to mention as well, these goblet prototypes are for an upcoming auction that we have once a year in the fall called Red Hot. And I know that we have quite a bit of time before fall, but they always like to start as early as they can and just use up any free time that they have. And just to point out as well, each time we're finishing these cups, this is going into the garage. So any glass we put in there is kept at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is warm for glass. It's not going to melt or change shape. It's not going to allow it to crack or break from thermal shock. So later on, all we'll have to do is take a blowpipe, just like Nick has done here, and he has a little bit of clear on the end of it, and he's just picked up one of those cups. So here's one of those larger cups we were creating earlier. And once again, this has been attached to the end of a hollow pipe, which you can imagine is like a giant straw. So we'll be able to blow air through it and into that cup to create our first bubble. And this metal table, this is the marver. We'll use the marver to roll the glass on to shape the glass, but to also cool the glass down in certain areas sometimes, because wherever the metal is touching the glass, it's kind of sucking the heat out of it. And that is going to prevent the bubble from blowing out very much in that direction. So sometimes they will purposefully cool the glass down. And because of the way that we were making these cups earlier, they have an opening in the end of them. So to close that opening off, Gabe has gone in with a couple of different tools, and he's just completely cutting off the end of this glass. So now we have one complete bubble on the end of our pipe. And from here, we can just blow it out as we would any other normal bubble, as if we didn't start with a cup on the end of our pipe. And I see quite a few new faces in the hot shop, so welcome to everyone who just joined. And if anyone has any questions throughout the process, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. And that applies to the entire audience. But I just want to let you all know that right now we're working on some goblets, which are these fancy cups right on this front pedestal right here. So this is a really good idea of what we're making today for anyone that is interested. And these are all prototypes, which is kind of like they're just trying to find different ideas for this type of glass. We have a really large variety, a few different kinds here. And we will see something completely different on the hot shop floor. So they might make a different stem for the goblet. They might make a different shape for the drinking portion of the goblet. We'll see what they do this time. But this time we're using the more bluish greenish color that you see with one of our goblets, this color here. And this is going to specifically become the drinking portion of our goblet, which they call the bowl up on top. So that's something interesting to point out is whenever the glass is hot, it's going to be glowing this really bright yellow-orange color, kind of like lava. But as soon as it cools down, it becomes its true color again. So the true color of this glass is this sort of blue-green color, but while it's hot, it's going to look orange pretty much no matter what. So this furnace at the center bench and all the way on the right bench, these are used for reheating the glass. So we constantly keep the door open at around this opening size, and we'll be able to go into the furnace and come right back out without having to worry about opening and closing anything. Meanwhile, this one, we keep the door closed to make sure that it stays really hot inside, because this is actually holding our molten glass. So each time we come into this furnace with a closed door, we're getting fresh, clear molten glass on the end of our pipe. And as you saw, this texture of that molten glass is a lot like honey. And so it's very viscous, it's sticky. If we were to stop turning, that glass could actually drop or drip off of the end of the pipe and onto the floor. So that's why we're always moving our glass and we're always turning the pipe. And just to talk a little bit about what they're doing at the center bench, so they've just attached two little bits of clear to the bottom of the bubble. And this is creating something called the ovulio, which is basically just a connecting point between the drinking portion of our goblet and the stem. It's this really kind of delicate connecting point right here. And then next, we're going to attach a second pipe to the bottom of that ovulio, what we've just created. And this second pipe is going to allow us to break this bubble away from the pipe it was created on. So we've just attached the punty, which is that second pipe. And now after breaking that bubble away, we now have access to the other side of the piece. So this is something we do with pretty much anything we make in the hot shop, is we attach a second pipe and then we break the piece away. And this gives us access to the other side of the piece. So now we can start to open this up from this small opening that we have left over. So today is specifically our Museum of Glass Hot Shop team. Sometimes when you come into the museum, you'll see visiting artists or people who are creating commission pieces, or sometimes they'll even be making store items in here. But today, our hot shop team, this is our resident hot shop team, are just making some goblet prototypes. And I want to point out real quick that we've just broken this cup off, and this is carried over to the garage as well, this large silver box, to keep the glass warm at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And usually when we're done with the piece, it'll go completely away in these large black boxes called annealers. But this silver box is going to keep it warm so we can pull it back out again later on and then attach it to the top of our stem. So you guys will be able to see us assemble everything together in a little bit. So just to point out real quick, our clear molten glass is sitting at a really steady 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it runs at that temperature 24/7, so all the time, we never turn it off. In our open face furnaces we use for reheating the glass, they run a little bit warmer between 21 and 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit just to heat up that glass a little bit quickly. And we do turn these off when we're done using them, and then we usually turn them on like an hour before we start again. So just to talk about colors again real quick, the colors come from different metals and minerals mixed into the glass. So just as an example, I'm not sure if a lot of you guys know what cobalt is, but maybe some of you have heard of cobalt blue glass, which is a type of metal going into the glass to get this rich blue color. And we also have a kind of expensive glass. It's like this pinkish cranberry color, and that's coming from gold chloride. It's expensive because it is coming from gold, or it has part gold in it. Yes, so something I should mention, since I do have a lot of youth in the crowd, I've had a lot of interest in the glass art, so I want to mention a couple of things. Some of you guys have probably already heard of Kids Design Glass, so if you're 12 and under, you can submit a drawing, and this has the chance to turn into glass in the hot shop right here. You would be invited back in, and they would make your piece right in front of you. You get to take one home, and one is displayed in the museum. It's a really good opportunity. But if you're 12 and older, you have an even better opportunity, something that a lot of you guys can look forward to, and that is something called Hilltop Artists. So if you guys are local, there's a couple of schools out here that have hot shops in the back of them. And once you turn 12 or in 7th grade, you can start blowing glass yourselves, which is also an entirely free program. It's actually something that I personally went through myself. So if anyone has any further questions about that, you could feel free to ask me about that as well. Now, at this bench, I want to point out that we have created another bowl, the top of our goblet, and this one actually does have the same design as our last one, it looks like. And usually we'll make like 2 to 4 of these in a row, just so we have a few set aside, and then we start making the stems and assembling them all together at once. And I believe that they do this just to kind of get a flow in the way that they're working. They can get a few of these, and then if they make a stem, they can simply pull one out and attach it to the top of the stem. If it breaks, they could just pull another one out. Then they don't have to get rid of the stem, if that makes sense. So we are at the point that I was pointing out last time, where we've attached a punty to the bottom of our bubble, the second pipe, and we're breaking the bubble completely away from the pipe it was made on. So this is a giant wooden paddle. I actually haven't seen one this large in a little while. But we do use wooden paddles in the hot shop pretty frequently. Sometimes we use them to shield the artist's hands and arms from the heat coming off of the glass. So sometimes you'll see us kind of hovering around with the wooden paddle. And then sometimes we'll actually use the paddle to flatten areas of the glass, which is why our paddles are so charred, is because they do physically touch the glass sometimes. So in this case, they were just using the paddle to make sure that this strand of glass that he was cutting off didn't curl around and touch the artist's hand as he was cutting, which is definitely important. And these pieces of glass that are broken off, I want to point out, they look as if they're cool now, but they could still be at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The glass is completely solid again at that temperature, and so it's important that we don't touch any tools or any pieces of glass that were just used, at least not the wrong end of the tools. So we're not using these today, but these are top load annealers. So we're loading it from the top rather than loading it from the side like we usually do with these large black annealers here. So sometimes we'll use these specifically so we could pick something up from the top. It's a lot easier than trying to pick something up from the side and maybe it being off center. So we do have a couple of specific uses for those, but mainly they are used to cool things down very slowly and prevent thermal shock. So we've gotten started on our first stem, and I missed this earlier, but we created a small clear bubble, and then we probably stuffed this into a mold on the floor next to our furnace, and this has given us ridges across the surface of the glass. And these molds that we use are called optic molds. You can kind of hear the texture of the glass as they run those metal tools over the surface of the glass, just kind of further proving that we have those ridges. And these ridges are both a visual and a physical texture. And we did the same thing for, I think, all of the stems for these goblets on this front pedestal right here. We did use a variety of different molds, but we have that same idea going on where we've stuffed it into a mold and we now have a texture across the glass for our stem. And over on that right bench, Sarah's actually working with a small piece of glass, and this is taken on the form of a small cup. This is eventually going to be blown out into the shape for our foot. And you can see that this is a much smaller bubble for our foot than it is for the drinking portion of our goblet up on top. And so we are using a smaller piece of glass for that. And for those who just joined in, we've already created the drinking portion of our goblets. We've set them aside to stay warm as we create the stem and the foot of our goblet. And then eventually we'll be able to just pull that back out and attach everything together. So actually, something fun to bring up is that there's many different kinds of glass. There's like a tempered glass that you might use for car windows. There's soft glass, or what do they call it? Soda lime glass, like we're using in the hot shop here. So it has soda ash and limestone in it. And then there's another type of glass called borosilicate, which they use for beakers, like scientific glass. So there are just a few examples in that one sentence, but there are many other kinds of glass on top of that as well. And they all have slightly different ingredients. They're all treated slightly differently to turn into those final products. And I want to point out we've dropped our bubble onto the bottom of our stem. And this is called a blown foot. So we literally have taken a bubble, we've blown it, and then dropped it onto the bottom of our stem. And to open the end of the bubble up, all they had to do is break off a section of that bubble, and that left them with a small opening. And from there, all they're doing now is flaring this open into a plate-like shape to create our foot, and the foot and stem should be done after that. And then we'll get ready to start assembling the entire goblet all together. And based off of the previous designs we've made, we may see them add some other things to the stem. Like this one, we have some leaves. So we'll see what they continue to do with this stem as they finish it off. And just once again, real quick, for anyone new that's joined, we are making goblet prototypes today specifically. So that's why we're seeing a variety of goblets both on this pedestal and on the hot shop floor today. And these prototypes are for an upcoming auction that we have once a year in the fall called Red Hot. And they will make goblets for this auction each year. And I can't remember exactly how many they make. I think they usually get about 50 of them or so. But it's important that they start this prototyping pretty early on, like they are right now. Even though that auction is coming up in the fall, they need to be able to create a pretty wide variety of them in between visiting artists and other special events that we have going on at the museum. And we've been bringing over these small bits of glass, and they're cut off before immediately being stamped with the leaf crimp, which is this tool that Gabe's been using to get this leaf pattern. So we should have this sort of ridges across the surface of the glass to create that leaf texture. And then this is touched down along the side of the stem. So for those who just joined, once again, we are creating some goblet prototypes today. If you don't know what a goblet is, we actually have some examples out on this front pedestal right here. So this is a really good idea of what we're making today is what you can see right here. And we're actually working with this sort of blue-green color right now. Might be a little bit hard to see, but this is the color that we're working with. And while the glass is hot, sometimes that color can appear anywhere between orange and that blue-green color. But once the glass cools down fully to room temperature, we will see only that blue-green color, the true color of the glass. Yes, so inside of the garage here, I just want to point out this is the garage. Anything that we put inside of it is held at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And we have a bunch of these little cups that we made earlier that we're using to blow out these individual portions of our goblet, such as the foot, like we have right here, and the bowl, the drinking portion of our goblet. And right now, I believe Sarah is getting the drinking portion of the goblet ready. So we've already created this top part of the goblet. All we have to do is pull it out and attach it to the top of the stem, which at the center bench, we've just broken the stem off of its original pipe and onto a second pipe. This is going to give us access to the top of the stem. And of course, I should also mention to everyone who just joined, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. It can be questions about pretty much anything. Yes, so the sand comes from, or actually, I should say the glass comes from mostly silica sand, as most sand is made of. And it also comes from a little bit of soda ash and a little bit of limestone. There are different glass mixtures, but that is the one we use in this hot shop. It gives us a little bit of a softer glass with a lower melting point. And at the center bench, I want to point out real quick, it looks like we're getting ready to attach the top of our goblet. All we need to do is bring over a small bit of clear, attach this right to the top of the stem, and this is going to act as a glue as we immediately attach the drinking portion of our goblet. So it looks like our glass cracked, maybe from thermal shock or something, but this is broken off into the furnace. So just real quick, Gabe has taken that piece out so that it can't melt into a puddle inside of the furnace. But at least you guys got to see the finished goblet for a split second there, right? Yes, as I'm sure you guys can all imagine, these goblets have a bunch of small components coming together. And the small glass. So I'm not quite sure about the easiest thing to make out of glass. It really depends on who you're asking. I've seen the fastest thing that I've ever seen made out of glass, which is maybe a little glass flower or maybe a glass horse. So Nick sculpts glass horses over on that right bench, and they are not easy by any means, but he's made thousands of them and he can whip them out in like a minute. So he makes it look easy. Yes, so you can make pretty much anything you can imagine out of glass. I've seen people make basically, I think they're called rondelles. It's like a round window shape, kind of window pane out of glass. You can make drinking glasses out of glass. There's different kinds of glass. So you can make beakers, like literal beakers that are used over fires and it's not going to melt or crack. Yes, so I'm not sure how frequently this happens, but every now and then I've seen glass blowers have like these little challenges where they're only allowed to use one object that everyone else chooses, and they've chosen ridiculous things like you can only use the ground to make this object, you can only use this banana peel to make an object, and so they can go crazy with that idea. As long as you're not touching the glass, you can pretty much use anything to shape the glass. I think, of course, there are limitations. Like you probably shouldn't use another piece of glass to shape glass because if you touch hot glass to cold glass, it will crack the cold glass. And that could be dangerous because it would be sharp. But you can use even paper and wood to shape glass. It will burn, but you can use it for a certain period of time, especially if you soak it in water. So our glass furnaces, just to point out a couple of furnaces for you guys, are large tanks with the closed doors specifically. These hold our molten glass, and it stays at a really steady 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the open face furnaces are actually even a little bit warmer, between 21 and 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. So this furnace will heat up the glass pretty quickly. We only have to be in there for maybe up to a minute or so. And if we were to keep it in there long enough, it could go back to completely molten. So the largest piece of glass I've seen them make in this hot shop was actually this 80-pound clear glass bell jar. And if you don't know what a bell jar is, it's basically like this dome of glass that you usually use to cover another object. But it was so big that I think one of you guys could curl up inside of it, like crawl inside of it. It's huge. And it took a team of 3 large glass blowers to be lifting the pipe and the glass all at the same time. There couldn't be one person on the pipe, otherwise it would be so heavy that they couldn't hold it up. Actually, interesting enough that you mentioned that, we were making a glass chair on Wednesday. And I've seen full scale glass chairs before. It's not something that you would actually sit on, but this chair that we were making on Wednesday was not to scale. It was a little bit smaller. But yeah, I've seen glass chairs. I've seen pretty much glass anything. You can make anything out of glass. So there, once again, are many different kinds of glass. I've actually seen people make chain links out of glass, and using those chain links, they were able to kind of put them all together and create something that you can wear over your chest, but it is completely see-through, so it's something you would wear over clothing. It's not actual clothing itself. But yeah, they can make glass into pretty much any shape you can imagine, including those chains that come together to create this sort of chest piece. So when we finish a glass piece, it's going to have to go into an annealer, which is these large black boxes on our far walls. And this will slowly cool the glass down overnight. We don't want the glass to cool down quickly, otherwise it will crack and break from something called thermal shock. And thermal shock happens when you heat up or cool down glass too quickly. It works both ways. And something I like to bring up is maybe like pouring boiling water on a frozen glass windshield, then it might crack. That's a really good example. Now, real quick, I want to mention at the center bench, we're actually blowing out the top to our goblet, which is called the bowl. And it looks like we're still using that same blue color. Earlier in the day, we sectioned off this large tube of blue color, and we're using it to blow out these individual portions of the goblet, the bowl and the foot of the goblet. And for those who just joined in, once again, this is what's the word for it again? These are goblet prototypes. This prototyping is for an upcoming auction that we have once a year in the fall called Red Hot. And so we are getting started pretty early on these prototypes, but we do have things going on in the hot shop very frequently, so they need to fit it in wherever they can to make sure that they get a really good variety of prototypes. So right now they're making the bowl portion to the goblet, which is the drinking portion of our goblet, which is, once again, on the front pedestal right here. So this portion up on top is what we're making right now. And we've just brought over a couple of bits of clear glass to the center bench. And these are coming together to create something called the ovolio, which is basically just the connecting point between the bowl of our goblet and the stem of our goblet. You can see we have this really thin, kind of dainty glass connection right here. Did I already mention the Hilltop Artist Program to you guys? Is that something that sounds familiar? So probably not yet. So the previous group that was in here, I mentioned it to them, but just to mention it again to you guys, once you guys are 12 and older, you are allowed to join this program called Hilltop Artists, and that allows you to blow glass for free in after-school programs, summer programs, all sorts of opportunities. And I want to specifically point out that every third Thursday of the month, they actually come into this hot shop right here and blow glass on this hot shop floor. And there's usually a pretty large audience that watches them as well, because that's the day that we have free admission into the museum. So they get to come in and watch the kids blow glass. And yeah, there's a variety of kids that show up for that, both in middle school and in high school. So the glass mixture that we use in this hot shop is specifically a soda lime glass. So it's mostly silica sand, as most glass is. But we also add a little bit of soda ash and limestone. So soda ash, kind of like baking soda, just to give you guys an idea. And this lowers the melting point of the glass, so it melts at around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit instead of a higher temperature. And we've just finished our bowl. So once again, once we finish a bowl, this is set aside in the garage to stay warm. And this box is holding it around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to prevent that glass from breaking from thermal shock. So later on, once we create the stem and the foot of our goblet, all we have to do is pull that bowl back out and we can attach it right to the top and finish one goblet completely. And as I mentioned earlier, we usually will make a few of these bowls in a row, but I believe we do already have a couple set aside as well as that one that we just made, so they may move on to making a stem pretty soon here. Yeah, so we will be making one more bowl, and then we'll be moving on to creating the stem of the goblet and assembling all of these together. So since you guys missed the very beginning of the process, when we first made these little cups of color, I think I'll actually play a video to show off how we got the color in the first place. So could I actually have that color overlay video, please? We'll just have to wait a moment. Could I have that color overlay video, please?
The color in glass comes from adding various materials to the mixture of raw ingredients called batch. Most of the colorants are compounds containing some kind of metal. For example, adding cobalt to clear glass creates a deep blue. Tin and antimony can be used to create white glass, and gold chloride can produce a rich red or pink colored glass. Colored glass is melted in furnaces, just like clear glass, and then is usually rolled into bars for storage and easy application. In order to apply color bar to a bubble, we first need to preheat the color to approximately 950 or 1000 degrees Fahrenheit in a color oven or garage. Once warm, the color is then picked up on the end of a punty rod using a little bit of clear glass as a support. The color is then heated in the 2300 degree glory hole to soften it and make it malleable, while another artist creates a small bubble of clear glass on a blowpipe. Once warm, the color is dropped over the clear bubble, and then using a variety of hand tools or the steel marver, the color is rolled back over the clear in an even layer. This process is called dropping color, or creating a color overlay. Depending on the project, that bubble is then usually gathered over with clear glass and blown into the final form. The finished product may appear to be all made from colored glass, but when viewed in cross-section, we can see that there is only a thin layer of color sandwiched between many layers of clear glass.
So that's what we did at the very beginning of the day to get this sort of blue-green color on the glass that we're using right now. We had that color overlay of that transparent blue-green, and then we created this really long tube from that bubble and sectioned it off into these individual cups, which we're now blowing out into the top and bottom section of our goblets. And right now we're just creating the Evolio, which I'm sure I've pointed out before, is this little connecting point at the bottom of the bowl, right where it connects to the stem. Something I haven't gotten to point out today yet is them trimming off the opening of this piece. This is something you'll see them do with almost any blown piece. They'll cut off the excess glass around the opening. This is where they broke the piece off of that original pipe, so the glass connecting there is usually a little bit thicker, and that break isn't always perfectly even. So this is just going to get rid of that excess glass, leave them with nice, thin, straight walls and a straight, even opening. And after they've trimmed that glass off, usually they'll fully open it up to whatever size they want, and that piece is pretty much finished. And once again, this is the last bowl that we're making in a row right now, and then we'll be able to start on the stems and the feet of these goblets, and we'll be able to start assembling them all together. And something you'll notice before we break this piece off, we'll torch at this connecting area. They'll torch it enough that it's soft, kind of malleable, and then they'll cut at the connecting point, which is causing a little bit of shocking in the glass from the cutting and the pressure, as well as just weakening that connection in general. And we will also heat up this fork a little bit before we pick up this piece of glass. We don't want any cold metal touching the hot glass, otherwise it could crack and break it. So now after cutting at this connecting point, Gabe will go ahead and tap the pipe, and that should break this piece cleanly off. Yes, so now we're getting started on the stem of our goblet. And once again, this is starting with a small clear bubble. And right after creating that bubble and heating it up, this is stuffed into a small mold on the floor. And this mold is a little bit special. This is the pineapple mold. And do we have an image of that pineapple mold? It's okay if it takes a second. But this mold is really hard to describe, so I do kind of want to show off an image to you guys. It basically has all these inward-facing spikes that push into the glass and create dimples across the surface of the glass. And we do have one goblet on display that does have this texture. Oh, perfect. We have the mold up on the screen. So sometimes we use this mold to create air bubbles in the glass as well, which we're not this time. We're just getting the dimples across the surface of the glass. Thank you. And yes, once again, for those who just joined, I want to point out that today we're specifically making goblet prototypes, which is why you're seeing a variety of goblets on this front pedestal. They're trying to make a variety of different kinds and shapes and colors. They are going along with a sort of color theme and a theme in general for this year's auction that they're making these for. And something else I want to point out is if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. So the glass itself is coming from mostly sand, a little bit of soda ash, a little bit of limestone. This is specifically a soda lime glass. And they throw that sand mixture into the furnace and it melts down into a giant pool of molten glass. So that tank that we've been gathering our clear glass from, that's what I am basically talking about. And it holds up to 1,000 pounds of clear molten glass. It's this giant tank, probably up to my hip in there. So these pieces of glass, we did a little bit of prep work for earlier. We started the process right at around 10 a.m. And we would have had one complete goblet by now. We did have it sadly break. I would say each of these pieces might be taking 30 to 45 minutes. This is a little bit more of an experimental piece, but if they're making something small, they're working with small pieces of glass like this, they do try to work with it quickly to make sure it doesn't get too cold. And we aren't using a lot of torches today, if at all, but this small handheld torch we're using, they're heating up just the stem with it, and that's the purpose of using a torch, is to heat up just a section of glass at a time, which is important, so we can focus heat to one area and only work on that one area without working or heating up anything else. So the largest piece I've seen them make in this hot shop was an 80-pound clear glass bell jar, and they do have a chance to continue making larger pieces in that eventually, but that's still the largest thing I've seen them make in here. And it's so heavy that they had to have a team of 3 people lifting it on the end of the pipe at all times. And it's so big that you could easily crawl inside of it and like be inside of it. It was massive. So the different colors come from different metals and minerals mixed into the glass. So just as an example, apparently white comes from tin and antimony, tin like a tin can, and antimony is another metal on the periodic table. And so those mixed together will create white, and that's just a good example. But we don't mix it ourselves here in the hot shop. We actually get it shipped in this bar form, and this is called color bar. It's just a solid bar of colored glass, hence the name. And we'll melt this section down and then basically spread it over top of our clear bubble to create a really smooth, even layer of color across the entire piece. So the glass is completely molten at around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. The furnace that we hold the molten glass in specifically sits at a steady 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it runs at that temperature 24/7 so that the glass is always ready. Technically, I think that the glass could be at a lower temperature and still technically be molten, but it's not going to be soft enough to gather it on the end of our pipe. Wow, I can hear you very clearly. Good job. And these pieces that we're making today take about 30 to 45 minutes each so far at seaming. We started at 10 a.m. We did a little bit of prep work, and now we've moved on to making each of the individual goblets. So when we cool down the glass, it cools down through a really slow process called annealing. We have to prevent the glass from breaking from thermal shocks. We have to cool it very slowly and heat it very slowly. At the center bench, I want to point out real quick that we've just blown a small colored bubble, and this is being literally dropped onto the bottom of the stem. And this is creating a blown foot. So this is literally a blown bubble that will eventually be opened up and then flared out into that plate-like shape called the foot. So these are pieces that were made on a previous day. I didn't even see them setting them up behind me, but it looks like they're taking some pictures for the store or the Instagram or something. Yeah, these are pieces that you guys can see in the Museum of Glass store if you're interested. I mean, you can try to make pieces of glass as small as you want. Whether you want to be able to see what they are or not is another question. You can make it so small that you can't really see the shape of it. But you can technically make like glass beads as an example. Those are really small pieces of glass. So we don't have this furnace on today, but this furnace right here is the largest, and we use this for extremely large pieces. It's never on unless we have a huge project. So that project I was mentioning previously, the giant glass bell jar, was made using that furnace there. Yeah, I understand that question, but we can change the temperature of the furnaces so they can all be the hottest, they can all be the coldest at any point in time. So I'm not quite sure how hot glass can get up to. I know at some point glass can actually burn. So there are small torches that you can work with, and the torch is super hot, but it's a focused flame. And so if you use a small amount of glass with that really hot focused flame, you can burn the glass. It'll boil, it'll turn gray and brown. And it's just not ideal. So we do keep the temperature just at the point where it is molten and no higher. So the museum opened up in 2002. So this museum is about 22 years old. So sorry, I couldn't hear you super well, but these guys all have 20 years of glassblowing experience and more. And one of our hot shop team members, who isn't on the floor today, he has about 30 years of glassblowing experience. But right now at the center bench working on these pieces, Gabe, he has about 27 years of experience, I think he told me. And I would say a professional glass blower or a glass artist usually has about 10 years of experience, but I've seen less than that with people who still come into the hot shop and make some really professional artwork. So it really depends on the person. I think I'm going to answer from right to left, my right to left. So I've actually never seen these guys get burned in the hot shop. And if you do get burned, it's usually pretty small and you accidentally touch something that looks cold but isn't cold. It's no worse than touching something hot in your kitchen. So we have our Museum of Glass store in the museum itself, and that's usually where our pieces go that we make in the hot shop. And I also want to point out real quick, we've flipped the orientation of our stem by attaching a second pipe to the bottom of the foot. We've attached a small bit of clear to the top of the stem and are now attaching the bowl of the goblet, assembling this goblet completely and finishing it off. So if all goes well from here, all we have to do is adjust everything, make sure everything is straightened out, and then this goblet will be complete. So the glass may appear different colors, but it's a little bit of a trick of the eye. Once the glass completely cools down, it becomes its true color again, which is supposed to end up this sort of blue-green color. And the little ball in the stem, this is supposed to end up as a sort of rainbowy shimmer color, but it has like this amber undertone. It's kind of hard to see, but this is like an amber stem, and it has almost this reflective metallic quality to the surface of it. And it looks like we're getting ready to break this off and put it away. So once again, all we have to do is apply a little bit of water to the end of our pipe. This is going to cause some purposeful breaking. And then we tap the pipe, and that should break this piece cleanly off. And let's give them a round of applause for finishing their first goblet of the day. And this is going into the annealer being this large black box. This will slowly cool this piece of glass down overnight so it doesn't break from thermal shock. And it's in there at around 950 degrees Fahrenheit. The box itself is at that temperature. And how it works is we press a button, it is programmed to slowly cool down. We could change it depending on the thickness of the glass. The thicker the glass, the longer it takes, I will say. So a lot of these guys have been working here almost since, if not completely since the museum opened. And once again, we do have one more Hot Shop team member who's not here today. They've all been here for a long time and all have over 20 years of glassblowing experience, most of it being at the museum at this point. And because we already made a lot of the bowls for these goblets earlier, which once again are the drinking portions of the goblets, we already have them made and set aside. We can now just continuously make the stems for these over and over again and bring those bowls out and attach them to the top. It looks like we're going with a different stem design this time. Once again, these are prototypes, so we are trying to switch it up and get some different designs in. And this is kind of fun because they get a lot of creative freedom when it comes to this. They get to pretty much make whatever they want with this glass. So we actually do have an apprentice in the hot shop, and we do have apprentices pretty frequently in the hot shop here and there. If you don't know what an apprentice is, it's basically someone who studies underneath someone else. So yes, you do usually get a lot of training and a lot of experience before you fully get a job in glass blowing. Well, something interesting to mention is we have a hot shop, we have a cold shop as well. And what we do in the cold shop is we grind, cut, polish the glass. Honestly, the tools look and feel kind of similar to woodworking tools, but we use diamond grit, which literally has diamonds in it, to cut the glass. And we use a lot of water to make sure we're not creating any glass powder that we could inhale. But yeah, the cold shop uses cold water with the glass. So something interesting versus the hot shop where we work with the glass hot. So actually, today we just have our Museum of Glass Hot Shop team members, but a lot of the times, I would say almost half of the time now, we have visiting artists that are coming in, and they're either like renting a bench or they are coming in as a visiting resident artist, and they get to create whatever they want and take it home with them. And so frequently you'll come in and you'll see something completely different going on, but these guys are still here assisting them usually as well. They will usually be here no matter if there's visiting artists, no matter if we're making store items or if we're working on commission projects. So the tanks with the closed doors specifically are glass furnaces, so they hold the molten glass, and we can't turn them off. If we turn them off, the glass will completely cool down to the point of being solid, and it will break the ceramic tank it's sitting inside of. So they run 24/7, no matter what. And we have two of them. So even if we're not using one of them, it's still going to be running. Usually if we're not using it, that means that it's either low or we've just filled it with fresh glass and it's still like melting down. And now after creating our stem, Sarah's just blown a bubble and is bringing this over to create the foot for our piece. Once again, this is a blown foot, so we blow a colored bubble in this case, and we're dropping this onto the bottom. This will be cut off, creating a completely sealed bubble. So their next steps are going to be opening the bubble back up, and then they'll be able to flare open like a plate. And as you can see, they added some extra designs to the stem as well. And I would like to compare this to this one goblet we have up on the front with these leaves on the side. So they most likely used a decorative crimp, which is like a metal tool that gives them a pattern. And then they were able to stretch that and create these shapes on the side of the stem. And we've just broken off the end of the bubble. And this is going to allow them to start going in and opening this up. It opened up a little hole into the end of the bubble itself. So we're not using this today, especially not today, but when we're working with really large pieces, we need to open up more and more doors to the furnace to be able to fit it inside and heat it up. And so sometimes we'll use this large wooden paddle and it has this notch inside of it. That notch will fit around the pipe and it blocks the heat from hitting the artist's hands, basically. It's when you stand in front of these furnaces, it is really hot. And you guys can feel that heat throughout the hot shop room, even though we have cold air. So now after flaring the foot for our goblet open, we're now preparing a second pipe with a little clear attachment on the end. Nick is preparing it right now. And this is going to be attached to the center of the bottom of the foot. It's going to allow them to completely break this piece away from the pipe that it was created on. And for those who just joined, of course, I want to point out that we're making goblets today, much like what you see on this front pedestal right here. And these are all different prototypes along with what we're making today. We're still prototyping for some goblets for an upcoming auction that we have once a year called Red Hot. And Red Hot is still a little bit of ways away, but they do have to create these prototypes as often as they can in between the gaps where we have visiting artists and any other important events going on. And after attaching that second pipe to the bottom, we've now broken the stem away from its original pipe, giving us access to the top of the stem, which is where we are going to attach the bowl of our goblet, the drinking portion. And we already have the bowl made, I want to point out. It's sitting inside of the garage. It looks like Sarah is preparing to pull it out, get ready to attach it to the top of the stem. And this is our final step in creating the goblet. We've just brought over a small bit of clear. This is attached to the very top of the stem. This is basically going to act as a glue as we go ahead and attach the bowl of our goblet right on top and push these two pieces together. And after attaching the bowl, this goblet should be pretty much complete. We just have to make sure that everything is straightened and evened out before getting ready to break it off and put it away. So we are getting pretty close here. So you could basically imagine the inside of these furnaces as a giant swirling ball of fire. We're constantly pushing natural gas into these furnaces, and that is constantly staying on fire. And I kind of like to compare it to like a natural gas stove at home, except of course this is much hotter, probably around 4 times the heat. And we're actually using a wooden paddle right now to just make sure that this piece is straightened out. We use wood a lot in the hot shop. It does burn the wood, but it's an insulating material. So when we're touching it to the glass, it's not pulling a lot of heat out of the glass, allowing the glass to remain hot. So it's really important that we use wood in the hot shop. And now to break this piece off, we're applying some water to the end of our pipe. All we have to do is tap the pipe. That should break this piece cleanly off. And let's give them a round of applause for finishing their second goblet now. And once again, once we finish any goblet, we're going to put it inside of this annealer. This is a large black box that sits at around 950 degrees Fahrenheit. And then with the press of a button, everything inside of it cools down all at once, preventing thermal shock. It's going to cool it down very slowly, at least overnight. So we're not going to see this piece again until tomorrow. And once again, for those who just joined in, we're goblet prototyping today. We're making some prototypes for an upcoming auction that we have each year called Red Hot. This is happening in the fall, so we do have quite a bit of time, but it's good to get started early because we do have important events happening at the museum pretty frequently. And so you'll see a variety of different shapes and sizes and possibly even colors of goblets being made today. And these 3 were made previously along with that same color scheme and theme that we're going for this year. And of course, this applies to the entire audience. If anyone ever has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. I'll come right over to answer your questions. So the metal tables we actually have throughout the hot shop. This one just stands out because it's the largest, and this is called a marver. And whenever we're rolling the glass on the marver, it can be to shape the glass, but it can also be to purposefully cool the glass down. And when you cool the glass down, it becomes harder again, as you might know. And so this is going to prevent the bubble from blowing out very much wherever they're cooling it down, and that can change the shape of the bubble overall. And next, we're actually making another bowl right now, which is once again the drinking portion of our goblet. And at this time, we're doing it out of clear instead of color like we have been so far today. So once again, the color of this glass, it looks as if it's this bright yellow-orange color, but that's just because of how hot the glass is. Once it cools down, it becomes that true color of the glass once again, which in this case is just going to be clear. And now we've just focused most of the heat onto the very bottom of the bubble. And this is so that we can flatten the bottom of the piece overall. So this is something that we do for the bottom of vases, bowls, pretty much anything you can imagine. We will flatten it with a wooden paddle. You'll also notice that we have those two blades on the side of the piece at the same time. This is forcefully pushing that glass into that nice crisp corner. If we were to just push from one direction, this would try to push out in a different direction, so we kind of have to force it into a geometric shape. And now we've just brought over a small bit of clear and attached this to the very bottom. And this is creating something called the avulio, which is basically just a connecting point between the bowl of our goblet and the stem, this really delicate connecting point right here. And I'll be able to walk around with a little example, honestly. These are the perks of sitting in the front row, guys. And now that we've created the avulio, which once again is this little connecting point we have, we'll go ahead and attach a second pipe with a little clear attachment on the end to the very bottom of that avulio. And Nick has just prepared that second pipe right now. This second pipe that we attach is called the punty. This punty is attached to basically flip the orientation of the piece or give us access to the other side of the piece. So once we attach this, all we have to do is break this bubble away from the pipe it was created on. And now that we've broken that off, as you can see, we have access to the other side of our piece. And we also have a small opening into the top of it. So we can start to open this up and flare it out fully into whatever bowl shape they want. We're going for a pretty different shape this time. So we have this geometric bottom to it. And it looks like our bowl broke, which means it probably got a little bit too cold. But luckily this is clear glass. We weren't wasting any color. And if we wanted to, we could technically reuse that clear glass as well. All we would have to do is break it apart and put it back into our furnace, our clear furnace, to melt down again. Yes, I want to mention goblets are pretty tricky because they are super small and oftentimes thin pieces of glass all coming together in multiple parts. They have to constantly keep the glass going in and out of the furnace to make sure it doesn't drop below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And on top of that, if they stay too long inside of the furnace, this can melt or change the shape of what they have. So goblets are just a very tricky thing to make, and I've been told the most technically challenging thing to make out of glass. So if we were to leave the pipe inside of the furnace that we were using to reheat the glass, it would just start glowing this really bright orange, but it's not hot enough to melt the metal. So we could just leave it sitting there. It's not good for the metal to heat it up to that temperature, and so we definitely wouldn't do that. If we were to leave a piece of glass in there, that could melt into a puddle though. So actually the process of filling the furnace and letting that fresh mixture melt down is actually just a process of 1 day. So they can fill it, melt it down, and then the next day it's ready to use, which actually seems pretty fast to me. Not sure about you. So it's hard to describe, but it's basically just natural gas being pushed into the furnace constantly, and that's it. It's the amount of gas you use, so you get a bigger fire, basically, more fire. And now it might be a little bit hard to see what he's doing right here, but Gabe is taking a small piece of broken glass and he's basically scratching this along the bottom of the piece. And this is just marking a really small line that we can't quite see, but it's marking a target to hit center when they bring over this small bit of clear glass like they just did right here. And we're at this point right here, which I was describing earlier. This is the ovolio, once again, this connecting point between the bowl of our goblet and the stem. Yeah, I want to mention these guys have all been working together for many years, and so they do work really fluidly as a team. If you do try to mix and match glass blowers, it can be a little bit more difficult. They just have slightly different styles and maybe even slightly different styles of communication. Frequently, we have visiting artists come in and they can bring their own assistants, but these guys often do act as assistants to those visiting artists as well. And yeah, that's a huge part of glassblowing is teamwork. You really can't work on your own if you're making a more complicated project like this. Yeah, I think something fun to mention would be that the person who sits at the bench, by the way, they're called the gaffer, kind of like the glassblowing team leader. And they frequently will switch off in this hot shop, but most likely you would see the person with the most experience sitting down at the bench and physically working with the glass themselves, and then everyone else will fall into a sort of assistant position. And these two metal blades that we're using here, I haven't been able to mention them very much, but these are the jacks. We use them for many steps in the process. We use them to create the jack line, which is a divot where the glass bubble is broken off from the pipe, which is where we broke this piece off earlier. And we also use it to open up our pieces. We were just flaring the opening of this piece out using the jacks. And for this piece in particular, we could continue to flare this open as wide as we wanted it. But it looks like we are going to stick with more of a sort of tulip shape. And it looks like this bowl is finished, so we're going to cut it off and knock it off onto this heated tray. Once again, it's important that the metal that is touching the glass isn't cold. Make sure that we're not causing any thermal shock. It looks like that connection point is just a little bit too strong, so he's going to heat it up and try knocking it off again. And after blowing that small clear bubble, this has been stuffed into a mold on the floor, which if I haven't pointed this out to you guys already, this is an optic mold, and it has these ridges on the inside of it. And those ridges have basically just been imprinted on the glass, so now we have ridges across the surface of the glass as well, which you can hear when Gabe is scraping that metal tool across the surface of the glass. But this is giving us a physical and a visual texture for our piece. And once again, this is just a part of the stem right here. We're going to continue to build the rest of the stem as long as we need it, and then finally build the foot on the very end, furthest away from the pipe. So you guys will get to see us assemble one complete goblet, just like you saw a moment ago. So we've just sectioned off this bubble into 3 different sections, and then added a small bit of clear to the very bottom. And this is either where we're going to build the rest of the stem, or we're going to simply create our foot right away and attach it to the bottom. And it looks like this is the rest of the stem. So next we're going to be creating a small clear bubble of glass and create the blown foot for this piece. And these small bits of clear are frequently attached in between any assembled pieces in the goblet, just kind of creating connecting points. And for those who just joined in, right now we are working on some goblets. We have some examples on this front pedestal of the color scheme that we're going for. We're using this sort of blue-green color right here, and then this light pink color. One of them even has like a little bit of an orange tinge to it. Not quite sure which one we're going to officially go with, but these are all prototypes along with what we're making today as well. We're continuing to make prototypes for an upcoming auction that we have once a year called Red Hot. And this happens in the fall, so we have quite a bit of time to create these prototypes and then the finished product. But it's good that we get started very early like we are right now, because we do frequently have important things going on in the hot shop, such as having visiting artists coming in. And right now we're working with all clear glass. I'm not sure if the entire thing is going to be clear or if we're going to have a little pop of color, but we have been working with colors so far today, which has turned out to be this sort of blue-green. So there are multiple different ways to color glass. The way that we got the color for our glass today specifically was Color Bar, which is a solid piece of colored glass in my hand, just as a little example. We used a transparent color, of course. This is not the exact color that we used. And the color that we start off with is pretty much the final product. So if we start with a blue, it's going to end up blue. If we start with a white, it's going to end up white. But in the process of working with it in the hot shop, sometimes it can look a little bit different just from the heat and light that's radiating from the glass. And in this case, we also have been using these jars of color. This is called frit. It's basically shards of colored glass like sand. We'll take our clear molten glass and we'll roll it in the frit to pick it up. And it's kind of hard to see, but it does give us a slight speckled texture of color across the piece. And I think that they were using it to get the sort of metallic color on the stem as well as the green leaves in the stem. And at the center bench, we have finished our foot for our goblet. This started from a bubble. They opened that bubble up and they were able to flare it completely open like a plate. And now we're going to prepare the punty, which is a second pipe with a little clear attachment on the end. This is going to be attached right to the center of the bottom of the foot, and then we'll be able to completely break this piece away from the pipe that it's attached to right now. And at the same time, inside of this large silver box, this is the garage, and anything that we put inside of here is kept warm at around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We have the bowl for our goblet stored in here, staying warm, and all we have to do is bring it out, heat it up a little bit, and then attach it to the top of the stem. So we're getting pretty close to assembling a goblet right in front of you guys. So since I have a few new people here and there, I just want to mention once again that these are goblet prototypes. So all of them are completely different from each other. These are also goblet prototypes trying to follow the same theme of these same colors. And this is for an auction that we have once a year at the museum called Red Hot. This happens in the fall, so we're preparing quite early. But these eventually will technically be sold. There's something that you can buy. It's going to be in that Red Hot auction. And our final step, now that we have access to the top of the stem, is going to be bringing over a small bit of clear glass, attaching this right to the top of the stem, and then immediately attaching the bowl to our goblet right to the top. So once again, we've brought over that small bit of clear, and this is a very small amount that they're attaching to the top of the stem. This is going to basically act as a glue as they go ahead and attach that bowl. And now all they have to do is break that secondary pipe away. Ooh, and it looks like it broke off of its original pipe as well. So now they are going to try to attempt to save this by heating up the connecting point at the bottom of the goblet. Oh, okay, we're going straight to the annealer with this piece. So this is going to very slowly cool down inside of the annealer, this large black box over on the right wall. And this is going to stay at around 950 degrees Fahrenheit and then cool down. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause for their effort. So that was finished a little bit earlier than expected, but they did complete the goblet. It's all together, and it is put away. And does anyone have any final questions for me before we go off to our lunch? All right, so we will be back in about an hour from now. We'll have the official time posted on the screen, so make sure you keep an eye on that. And we also have that same screen displayed out in the Grand Hall on those little TVs. And we'll see you guys at around 2 p.m.
Okay, we're back on. Hello? Hello? Okay. Put you back in my ear. I can hear you better up here. Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Oh. I don't think it's having any audio down here. Mackenzie, you don't hear anything else, right? You don't hear me talking? Do you hear me talking at all through this? No, no, yeah, no, it's not coming down through here. Oh yeah, no, that earlier was we plugged it into one of the event mic ones, and yeah, no, I had to quickly turn it off because it was shrieking, so that was loud. Oh, okay. Gonna keep my words very kosher. Are you gonna? Oh yeah, just cut it so we can, do it.